Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at some of the different brushes that we can work with inside of ZBrush, as well as taking a look at things like our stroke type, alphas, and materials. Actually, we probably won't deal too much with stroke types today, but you'll see this will change as we look at different brushes. Now, we're not going to deal a lot with materials in this class, but if you're interested, you can definitely look through some of these shaders that are included, as they might actually give you better ways of sculpting, better in that you'll be able to see lights and darks differently rather. You'll also be able to kind of differentiate better between peaks and valleys. Sometimes it'll also help you wash out or oversaturate or over contrast details, if you're obviously focusing on those things. So materials are separated into two different types. We have matte caps, which are actually meant to mimic real materials or captured off of actual objects, and standard materials, which are not. The difference really comes in when we deal with lights. These captured materials, the matte caps, have baked in light. They don't react to actual ZBrush lights, while the standard materials do. Their highlights and things will change. Both will cast shadows. It's just the highlights and it's basically the lighting on these matte caps don't again pay attention to ZBrush lights. So typically I like sculpting in this gray material or in the skin shade. And I do also like using on occasion these basic materials as well. Again, feel free to explore the rest of these. I do have a lot of custom materials that are free for download on ZBrush's website. I can pull those up in my light box over here under material. You can see I have tons of them, and one of my favorites is this blue-gray one here. Again, it brings out a bit of detail. I kind of like the balance between dark and light, so it's one I do use quite a bit. For the sake of this tutorial, though, I'm going to go ahead and just probably stick with this matte cap gray. So now you've noticed I've been using primarily the standard brush. The standard brush just pulls out against the normals, nothing fancy. Again, if I want to push that back in, I can just hold Alt. You can see it pushes back in. There are, however, all kinds of brushes to play with, and really what you're seeing here isn't even all the brushes included. As a matter of fact, if you come here to Lightbox and go to, I believe, Brush over here, give that a moment, you can see there are a ton more brushes in these different folders. The reason these are typically hidden away is because they're just variations on brushes we already have. For example, you see there are a bunch of clay brushes here. However, under the brush menu, we already have several clay brushes. So just kind of more of the same over here. So let's explore some of these. Now, obviously, I can't go through all of these. I'm just going to go through the ones that I feel are the most important for sculpting, especially at an early stage. Now, the single most important brush you're going to use is going to be called the Move brush. You'll see that down over here. Now, it's a little bit easier to find these brushes if you isolate them. You can isolate them by hitting the letter of the key that their name begins with. So tap M, you'll see just obviously brushes that have M. And here's my move. There are other moves here as well, Move Elastic, Move Topological, but we're just going to choose Move. Now, Move is intended for moving things around, basically large-scale changes. Let's see, that right there. These work really well at lower resolutions. I'm using my Shift-D shortcut now to move down in subdivision levels, except I just realized I don't have any. I'm still in Dynamesh mode. That's okay, but this tool does work fantastically at low resolutions. But you can see it allows me to move data around very, very easily. So if I want to go ahead and change the curvature of those, I guess maybe they're horns, who knows what they are. You can see it's a little bit off. We'll just re-Dynamesh by control dragging, which didn't work. My Dynamesh might be off. It is, so we'll just click that back on. And there we go. It's re-Dynameshed for me. Cool. So turn off my wireframe there. So the snake hook is similar. That's right here. We actually looked at this a little bit earlier. You can see that allows me to move, but it can actually continue pulling that geometry. Now, while I very rarely use it for more than maybe pulling out some spikes or maybe horns like this, I very rarely use it for the actual snake kind of bit of it there for more than that. However, it really is great as another version of the Move tool. It has a different type of elasticity to it, and I find it can actually get you really, really interesting results. It's just a little bit more organic. There we go. Cool. So that's the snake hook and the move. There are also move topological, which will actually pay attention to topology. It's much like the soft selection in Maya when you're dealing with surface versus volume. Elastic is a little unpredictable. It's moving, you could see it kind of stretches quite a bit. Sometimes it really doesn't even make much sense to me why it's moving the way it is. I'm sure there's some clever algorithm behind it that does make sense, but is really a much less predictable version of the move. Now, two extremely important brushes are the inflate and the pinch. The inflate brush, as you can see, can inflate geometry. So maybe I want to add a little bit more volume to this eyelid here. You can see I can do that there. I'm obviously using these a little heavy-handed right now so you can see the effects. You wouldn't really use them that heavily normally. The pinch is the opposite. So bring up my brush menu. I'm just tapping B for that, by the way, and I can hit P for pinch. And there it is. And the pinch brush will squish my geometry together. You can see that right there. Just go ahead and undo that. So those are, of course, really useful for creating things like wrinkles. You can actually bulge the skin around a wrinkle or obviously pinch a wrinkle together. However, we actually have to excuse me, make our wrinkles. And one of the best brushes for any kind of fine detailing is the Damien Standard. Now, under the brush menu, you won't see the word Damien. It's under DAM, D-A-M. Hit D right there. There it is. And you could see this is basically a brush that carves right into our surface. Now, it is set up really heavy right now. I'm going to go ahead and bring the Z intensity down. Do that right there. Maybe also bring my size down. I'm tapping S to do that. And you could see how I can now come in and begin putting in some slightly finer detail, begin to separate out forms. There we go. And let me come in here a little bit more to right there. And then you can see how I can now grab, let's say, my inflate brush. I'll hit tap B, tap I, and you'll see that now it's isolated all of those brushes. And if you look at for inflate, right there, it's actually N. So if I were to actually start to spell inflate, I'll tap B, I, N. It actually selects the brush for me. So that's a nice little shortcut. And you can see I can now start to inflate. Let me actually go back a bit. The skin around it there to start overemphasizing that. And if I wanted to go ahead and bring these together, I could grab the pinch brush. I'll do the same thing. Tap B, P, I, grabs pinch for me. And you can see I can now start squeezing that together. So those brushes are great for different types of detailing. However, the most important brush to me, other than the move tool, really is going to be my clay brushes. Now there's three of them. There's clay, clay buildup, and clay tubes. They're all roughly similar, except the type of alpha they use and how they layer on top of one another. Let me grab clay buildup. That really is my favorite for concepting. It's meant to mimic the way clay actually layers onto a surface, as if you're sculpting and layering, or rather putting layers, strips of clay on to build volume. And you could see it kind of just powers over your geometry really, really easily. It can go right over these creases like they're nothing. Now it is squishing all your geometry together in there. However, with Dynamesh, as long as we control drag, you can see it'll fix all that up for us. So this is a great way to explore creating new volumes, new shapes, and just seeing how everything comes together really, really quickly. Now, of course, I'm doing this at a slightly higher res than I should be. Ideally, I'd be doing this work at closer to about 128 over here. There we go. I can also hold Alt, by the way, to push this in. Now, it's given me this really rough alpha here, which I actually personally like quite a bit. I know some people don't, and you can always change that alpha right here to any shape you want. You can maybe grab this softer sphere here, and it'll give you a much smoother clay buildup. Now, the big difference between clay buildup and, let's say, clay tubes over here is how, again, they layer. if I were to grab clay buildup and keep pressing, you can see that it's pushing out quite a bit. Something like clay tubes works identical to clay buildup, except it won't keep raising the surface. You can see it stops after one layer. So that way I can still have the same effect. It's just not going to build up nearly as quickly. And the regular clay brush is just like the clay tubes, except for the fact that it has no alpha, therefore it's just using my regular fall-offs that are set here in my focal shift. So there are, of course, other brushes here. The polish brushes, as you can see, can polish your surface and create these kind of harder edges, like that. We also have some other polishes here. There are brushes that are trimming brushes. Those are a bit more for hard surface type work, but you can kind of see how those work. They can actually work almost like the polish brushes, but they run across the surface and adjust to the normal. There we go. So it almost looks like you're kind of chopping away at it there. Just like that. And there are others you can experiment with. Again, I actually don't use a huge amount of these brushes. I primarily stick to the standard, the move brush, the snake hook, the clay brushes, the pinch, the Damien standard, the inflate, and on occasion I'll kind of dig through here and see what else I can find. But for the most part, those are my go-to brushes. But again, feel free to explore these. Some of these may not make a lot of sense. Things like Z-Project and Z-Mesher guides are not traditional sculpting brushes. Neither are these trim brushes. Those will all be covered in a future lesson. But again, don't let that stop you from exploring, and you'll just have to kind of play around with them and see what workflow works best for you. Different people like different brushes. I know some folks will do their entire sculpts just using the standard brush. Again, for me, I'll work with the clay brush for hours on end and really not feel the need for much else. Maybe occasionally jump to the Damien standard, especially at the concepting phase. So that's about it for brushes. Again, it's just a brief introduction to them. We're obviously not even talking about designing our own brushes. There's a menu over here where we can actually go in and adjust tons of different settings for our brushes. This is just more an introduction to the different brushes that are available for sculpting. All right, that's it for this one.